Proverbs chapter 4 is where we're headed tonight. I didn't mark it in my Bible like I normally do ahead of time. Feel like we went from cold to hot. Feel the same way? No in between. But that's really not hot. It's nice weather. Anyway, we finished up in Proverbs 4 and verse 5. If I have my markings correct in my book, in my memory right. And so what we have here is we have words and phrases of repetition. So we've seen, and we're going to see this throughout the first 9 chapters. Of course, when we get after the 9th chapter, there's still going to be a lot of repetition, right? Because we're talking about wisdom. We're talking about all these things that reinstill righteousness in this young man is what he was trying to do. And so there's some key words that I noticed as I was reading through this chapter. I read it several times. There's some words, and there may be words that jumped out at you. You know, I think about phrases, my son. How many times have we seen that phrase? Right? We see the word her or she in this chapter, but even in chapters preceding. And who are we talking about there? We're book of Proverbs, page 9, if you're looking for an outline. Anyway, and so we see this, and we come back, and we're going to begin in verse 6, chapter 4 and verse 6, and we'll read through verse 9 to start us out tonight. It said, "Do not forsake her, and she will preserve you. Love her, and she will keep you. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and in all you're getting, get understanding. Exalt her, and she will promote you. She will bring you honor when you embrace her. She will place on your head an ornament of grace, a crown of glory she shall deliver to you." And we go back, and we begin in the end of verse 4, but begin in the beginning of verse 4, and it kind of sets the stage for what we just read. "He also taught me and said to me, let your heart retain my words, keep my commandments and live. Get wisdom and understanding, for do not forget nor turn away from the words of my mouth. Do not forsake her." You know, what was Solomon's goal for his son? You think about your goal as a parent. What's your goal?
Raise your child and nurture happiness in the Lord.
Okay. Yeah. Now, so I've heard that said here in several different ways just now, right? Did somebody say, hope they survive? I don't know if they did. But anyway, your goal is to raise successful adults, right? And how do you become successful adults? Living your lives. What's that? Parents teaching, right? To live righteously. And so that's really, as we see over and over again, so he's saying listening to her, Lady Wisdom. And so here's the words that I have on your outline that I thought were pertinent to me as I read through this. Her or she, we've mentioned that, but the word let. What's important about let? Okay. Let them do it, right? And in this context, he said, let her, right? And when we think about that, what we're talking about is the willingness to accept, right? Without offense or a guard up, okay? And a lot of times as young people, we say, well, I don't want to listen to anybody else, right? But let wisdom in. Let her in. Let what is being said sink in. So that was something that was important to me. There's another one that says, do not. And this we're going to see as we continue on in chapter 4, okay? We live in a world today that does not like restrictions, right? But we live in a very restricted world, right? Are we more restricted than we were 20 years ago? 30 years ago? 40? We do. But we pretend, our society, our culture today, we pretend like we're not restricted. And in a lot of ways, we live like we're not restricted. And when we look at the cycle of the Judges, what does that lack of restriction cause? Restriction, right? Sin produces what? Bondage. And we see that. And so here he's giving, we're going to notice some warnings. Do not. Don't do it. Another one, a word that I noticed, or a word and a theme, was the word of keeping. And so when you take let, keep, and preserve, and keep and preserve are similar, right? You know, you think about people in their root cellars. What do? You keep food there. What type of food? Preserved food, right? Very similar in concept. And so here Solomon's writing words of wisdom in order to what? Preserve, right? His son. And so, but he's got to, in order for him to be preserved, he's got to keep these things. As we come back, we see verse 6, do not forsake her, and she will do what? Wisdom will preserve you. She will. From the words of my mouth, right? That's what Solomon was giving. Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore, get wisdom, and in all you're getting, get understanding, right? When we think about this, sometimes we make a priority list in life. And so a lot of times our priority list, everything else revolves around that one thing, don't we? Doesn't it? And so what's the principal thing? Wisdom being the same as righteousness. We obtain those things. We see exalt her and she will promote you. Right? Who are we talking about? Lady Wisdom. She will bring you honor when you embrace her. And so you go on and you see in verse 9, and she will place a head of ornament of grace, a crown of glory she will deliver to you. So in verse 10, again, we have, we'll read verses 10 through 13 here. Again, we see, hear my son, and receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be many. I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of righteousness when you walk. Your steps will not be hindered, and when you run, you will not stumble. Take firm hold of instruction, and do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life. And that let's a little bit different than what we talked about a minute ago. But we think about this theme of scriptures here. And when I thought about Proverbs 22 and verse 6. Proverbs 22 verse 6 tells us, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he's old, he'll what? Not depart from it. And we see the principle here. He says, hear my son, receive my sayings, and the years of your life will be what? Yeah, many, right? Train up a child in the way he should go. When he is old, he will not depart from it, right? Years being many, old. Those coincide with one another? Absolutely. And then he says, I have taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of righteousness. And I would think about that. Solomon, you think about his career. What was his career? You ever thought about that way? We say, well, Solomon was king in Israel. Was that his career? It's part of his job, right? He was a prophet. He's an imparter of wisdom. He was a father. And so you think about, what was his career? A lot of it we think about is being wisdom oriented, don't we? To be a good king, it had to revolve around what? Wisdom. To be a good father, revolve around wisdom. When he was living as a faithful Jew, it revolved around wisdom, right?
And when it talks about years of your life will be many,
Mm-hmm.
are they talking about the physical, or is it because you're righteous, even if something happens to you at a young age, you have salvation, you'll be going on to heaven?
As I read it, I'm relating this to the physical blessings associated with righteousness and righteous living. And so as we talk about Proverbs are what? Rule of thumbs, right? Train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he'll not depart from it. Is that a guarantee? No. We've kind of been talking on Sunday evenings during our study, that good parents may have a child that may not do everything right. Is that true or false? It's true, right? God the Father led the children of Israel in the wilderness. Did they ever depart? Why? Because they're free moral agents. Right? And did God do everything he was supposed to do? Absolutely. But they still stray from time to time. But the rule of thumb is what? That's what a proverb is, rule of thumb. And so we see here, I have taught you in the way of wisdom and have led you in the paths of righteousness. And we go back to verse 10, he says, "Hear, my son." What was Solomon doing to his son? Is he teaching him to be a king, a tradesman? What's he teaching him to be? Right with God. And we see that with the word wisdom. And when we do that with our children, when that is our number one focus, right? If we were to look at Luke 2:52, I think we've looked at it already in our study. But I want us to refresh our minds here and we think about this. Luke 2 and verse 52, it says, "Jesus increased in wisdom and stature and favor with God and favor with men." How much do we know about Mary and Joseph in comparison to some very prominent Bible characters? Not much. But we know a lot. Eric, he alluded to this, or he talked about this, not just alluded to it, on Sunday with his sermon, right? Because who was the last person he mentioned? You remember? Mary, right? And really, we don't know much about Mary. But whose mother she is, or was, says a whole lot about her, right? God chose her. Of all the women that have ever lived up to that time and after, chose her. And so with that being said, it says a lot about her. And then when we come back to verse 52, or Luke 2, Jesus increased in wisdom and stature. And we see the stature, right? What was he doing? He was growing physically. Is that a result of good parenting? That's the result of being human, right? He was being taken care of. And in favor with God and with men. Now, when we think about that, we go back, Jesus increased in wisdom. Where did he get his wisdom from? When you think about that seed that was planted, who would it start with? His parents. And we see him in the temple, right? Why is that? We say, well, it was because he was Jesus, because he was Son of God. Do you think that maybe because that's the type of person that his parents trained him to be? Have you ever thought about that? That's what I think about. And so we go back to verse 11. "I've taught you in the way of wisdom. I have led you in the paths of righteousness." As a parent, that's our job. "When you walk, your steps will be not hindered. And when you run, you will not stumble." Is this physically? Is he a track star? We're talking about in life. Because of the path that his father has laid before him, he'll be successful, right? He'll be successful. And if we think about this, and we think about Solomon as being the wealthiest man on the face of the earth at this time, right? And him ruling the most powerful nation that there was at that time, how many of the things that we read through these first 4 chapters point to anything physical as far as what Solomon's been trying to impart to his son? What are they? It's training of what? Of wisdom. And so then he goes on to verse 13. He said, "Take firm hold of instruction and do not let go. Keep her, for she is your life." That's the key. Don't let it go. If you want to be successful, hold on to these things. All right, any questions or comments from this section? All right, we're going to read verses 14 through 19. And when we think about this, we see the do nots. And so we see keeping yourself away from in this section of scriptures. And so here he said, "Do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of evil. Avoid it. Do not travel on it. Turn away from it and pass on, for they do not sleep unless they have done evil. Their sleep is taken away unless they make someone fall. For they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. The path of the just is like the shining sun. The sun shines brighter unto the perfect day, and the way of the wicked is like darkness. they do not know what makes them stumble. And so we go back and we look, really there's verses 14 through 17 and then 18 and 19. Almost a conclusion here, or a contrast as we look at these. And so we see here, do not enter the path of the wicked. There's a song that I think Eric and Jared taught the young people in Kansas City. There are two roads before you. You must make your choice, right? And so we think about that. That's a song I think about when I look at the scripture. Do not enter the path of the wicked, right? I think there's some people that believe that the pathway is righteousness on one side, wickedness on the other side, and you can kind of straddle the fence the whole way. When the Lord comes back, you jump on your side of the road. That's not the way it is. He said, do not enter the path of the wicked. We think about, and I know we read it for our study, we think about Psalm 1, verses 1 through 3 here, talking about the progression, right? We think about the progression of leaving God. And so we see here about when we walk in the way, stand, or sit with sinners, the progression. Solomon tells his son, do not enter the path of the wicked. And you think about this, there's some places in town that we just ought not be. You know, we don't have the news at home. But I remember growing up, you watch the news, and you see all these bad things that happen to people. And I know sometimes, you know, when you're younger, you don't know all these streets other than the news. But then you realize that this street is where all this crime takes place, or this part of town. And then you hear your parents or an adult say, well, what do you expect when you're in that part of town? You know, we hear the phrase, nothing good happens when? After 9? No, midnight. Anyway, for those that want to go to bed at 9. Anyway, you say nothing good happens after midnight. That's a proverb, isn't it? Right? We talk about those things. Do not enter the path of the wicked. You know, people say, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time. You know, there's some places that is always going to be the wrong place, and it's always going to be the wrong time. Solomon was warning his son, said, do not enter the path of the wicked. Do not walk in the way of evil. We think about that. Don't enter that path and don't walk that way, right? A lot of our young people say, well, I hang out with that person or I go to the places they go. What ends up happening over time? You get influenced, right? Even if you don't realize it, you're being influenced by that situation. We could talk a little bit as we talk about Proverbs, wisdom, and those sorts of things, gateways. I don't think we've talked about that in our study. But as we go through, this is a perfect example, these two verses. There's some things that we just ought not to do as Christians because it may open up the door, right? We say too close to the edge, right? Too close to the edge. We say we just need to avoid that situation. And that's hard when we talk to our young people. They say, is there anything wrong with that? You say there could be. Or it's going to lead that way. It's hard for them to understand, isn't it? But sometimes even as adults, we get in the same thing. We say, well, you know, what's it going to hurt for my child to be there, be a part of that, to go to this, right? And over time, what happens? They become comfortable with those people or that situation, that environment, a gateway. So here, Solomon, you know, we're talking about 3,000 years ago. Solomon says, don't even start down the pathway. Avoid it, do not travel on it, turn away from it, and pass on, right? Was it Monopoly? You say, pass on, go. Do not pass go, right? Yeah, don't go by there. Just keep on going. For they do not sleep unless they have done evil. You think about that. They do not sleep unless they have done evil. I don't know all the terms, but there's some people that have a propensity that they don't feel satisfied until they steal something. What is that called? That condition. Devoted to evil deeds. But I think about, what is that? Lost the phrase. Could have told you if you. Yeah, that's what it is, right? their mind has become perverted to the point where unless they do evil, they cannot. What's the verse say? Right? Is that an illustration of that? 3,000 years ago. Do you think that's, why didn't Solomon write that condition in here? Because we don't have to have a labeled condition to know what he's talking about, right? He's talking about, and it may not be stealing, it may be other things, that there's some people that just cannot live their life unless they're doing something wrong. I had one person tell me one time that they said, when you go to work and you leave for the day, they said, you got to take something home with you. Put something in your pocket. It's like, what are you talking about? And where they worked, some kind of manufacturing facility, and they had, nuts and bolts and screw bins and all this kind of stuff. I said, what are you talking about? And put something in your pocket. Put a handful of something. Why? I said, why? Do you need some screws at home? No, I don't need any screws at home. He said, that's the man. You got to get ahead of the man. And so his idea was, you couldn't go to a day of work unless you stole something from your employer. And we say, that sounds awful ridiculous. But, we've got to realize that our children go to school with some people that probably can't go to bed until they sin. That's what Solomon's talking about.
But I think you can be at the wrong place at the wrong time. Even as a Christian, sometimes you find yourself, whoops, how did I get here?
Yeah, but it's the whoops, how did I get here, not I'm going over
But
there.
I mean, like a mall shooting. I might just be shopping, and all of a sudden, but
Yeah.
mean, all of a sudden I'm involved in this situation, and it's not because I was seeking evil.
Yeah.
But I think this here is talking about walking with evil hand in hand.
That's right.
Something that you do consciously.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I only shot one person instead.
That's right. Well, it's like 2 a.m. outside the casino and I got robbed. I was at the wrong place at the wrong time. That kind of stuff,
Yeah, but you can be at your home and get robbed.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I do believe that you can be at the wrong place at the wrong time, but you don't walk with
But you don't set yourself up to be that in that. Yeah. Yeah.
Me and Emily ran into that in Nicaragua. We checked everything out here, thought we was on a good mission trip, and found out we was at the wrong place at the wrong time. It was supposed to be a good work.
But you did your due diligence, right?
Huh?
You did your due diligence, right? And here, like Kathy said, this is talking about making a league with, as far as you're just walking into that situation, say, hey, I'm here, right? And so the warning to abstain from. Yeah. Was there any situations that we have examples of in the Bible where people were at the wrong place at the wrong time that they had to get out of? Eric says there is. I'd agree with him. The one that pops in mind is Joseph with Potiphar's wife, right? Did he put himself in a bad situation? He took himself out of a bad situation, right? When he realized that it was headed down that road, he got out, right? Other ones I think about, Daniel, and you got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They were put in some difficult spots, weren't they? But they did the right thing, and they shunned away from evil and sought righteousness. And so that's the difference, yeah. But I agree with you, Kathy. Sometimes we're caught at the wrong place at the wrong time. But that shooting, and the one that always sticks in my mind, I remember, was a 3 a.m. outside the strip club. I don't remember how many people died. And they're like, and somebody said, yeah, we were just at the wrong place at the wrong time. We heard all that shooting. It's like, yeah, But and it was the part of town it was in Kansas City and everything. But anyway, we go on, and we see here, unless they have done evil, unless they make someone fall. Not only do they want to do evil, but what do they want to do? Why? Why is that?
because they feel like they've wasted a day if they haven't succeeded in that.
That's right. You think about that. There's some people, I don't know about you, a lot of times I'd rather do stuff. I love road trips, but I don't like road trips by myself, right? I love to go on road trips, but take somebody with me. And they're on this road trip of sin and unrighteousness. Unless they drag someone along with them, they're not happy. So you think about that. For they eat the bread of wickedness.
I think that's part of the thrill of it for them.
Mm-hmm.
They're on that road and they want to see how many more they can drag with them.
Well, and none of that, probably, unfortunately, probably all of us have been in a situation where we're with a group of people and their goal is to get you to fail or fall because they know about your moral standard. And until they get you to fail in some way, they're not convinced. Probably everybody here's been in a situation like that. You just got to get out.
And it makes them feel successful.
Makes them feel successful and justifies them because then they say, hey, look, even somebody like you, a Bible thumper, you know, they'll fall. What's that? It clears their conscience. There's exactly right. So they eat the bread of wickedness and drink the wine of violence. That's what their life is. We think about those that eat, drink, and breathe baseball or whatever. It's baseball season here in Eagleville. And we think about that. That's what their life revolves around is wickedness. So then we have verses 18 and 19. We see the contrast one to another. But the path of the just is like a shining sun that shines ever brighter unto the perfect way. We see the same thing when we get into the Gospel of John, chapter 1, talking about the light. Who's the light? Christ is the light. And so when you get to verse 19, it says, the way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. Why? Because they're walking in darkness. And so the things that trip them up in life are going to be their vices. Why is that? Because that's the path they're going down. And the only way to go, can't say it right, the only way it's going to lead to is failure. You say, well, I built this business around unrighteousness. I made a lot of money because of unrighteousness. But it's destruction in the end. All right, any questions or comments? We'll get on to verses 20 through 27, end of the chapter. We've got a few minutes left. Again, he says, my son, give attendance to my words. Incline your ear to my sayings. Do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart, for they are life to those who find them, the health of all their flesh. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. Put away from you a deceitful mouth, and put perverse lips far from you. Let your eyes look straight ahead, and your eyelids look right before you. Ponder the path of your feet, and let all your ways be established, and do not turn to the right or to the left, and remove your foot from evil. Again, we're talking about this pathway, the two roads that are before us in this section. And so when you look at verse 25, here in the middle of this section, it says, let your eyes look straight ahead. As we looked at verses 18 and 19, as we finished just a moment ago, we see the way of the wicked is like darkness. They do not know what makes them stumble. Have you ever been stumbling around in the dark? Been to Branson, to Silver Dollar City in that cave or other caves? So dark. Which way do you look? There's no light. You're looking for darkness. And so we see this. It says, let your eyes look where? Straight ahead. Your path is lit. You know where you're going. You see what you're doing. Avoid distractions, right? Concentrate. So we go back and we look at verse 20. He says, my son, give attention to my words. What are we talking about? A pathway. Walking down the path of righteousness. Give attendance to my words. Right? Pay attention. That's the path you're on. Incline your ear to my sayings, and do not let them depart from your eyes. Keep them in the midst of your heart. And so here we see in verse 21, we see the eyes and your heart. What's important about things that are near and dear to your heart? And so that's what Solomon wants his son to do with these words of wisdom, right? How many of you have ever done something and after the fact said, that wasn't smart, we say, right? We say, that wasn't wise. Or I knew better. It's another way of saying the same thing, isn't it? And so if we keep these things in our heart and are reminding ourselves of these things, are we more likely or less likely to stumble? Less likely. And so that's why Solomon wants his son to keep these things. Don't let these other things distract you. Keep them in the midst of your heart, verse 22, for they are life to those who, what? Find them. Think about when I was younger, we didn't have video games at home. My brothers got video games, but I didn't. We had Mario, right? The original Nintendo. And so you get these coins along the way. You remember that? And so as you think, if you walk in the pathway of righteousness all the way along, you find these little coins, right? These bonuses all along the way. I think about that. He says, for they are life to those who find them, and health to all their flesh. Keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. We see in verse 23 the word diligence. Is it easy? Has Solomon ever said this is the easy path? No, he says this is the better path. And I think that's something that we as Christians need to make sure we're constantly reminding ourselves of, is that we're on the better path, not the easy path. And a lot of times we say the easy path is the good path, but that's not really the case, is it? We're on the good path, not the easy path. And so, keep your heart with all diligence, for out of it springs the issues of life. And we just got a minute. I'd like to spend a little bit more time on verse 23, so we're going to end here, and we'll pick up next Wednesday night, Lord willing, with verse 23 and talk about this, and then we'll proceed. Any questions or comments? Appreciate your